Have you ever had frozen shoulder? There is a huge muscle influence with frozen shoulder, but it is rarely ever discussed. On this week's episode of the Exercises Health Podcast, we want to start that conversation diving into the role that muscles play in frozen shoulder. We're going to cue our introduction and then dive right into this conversation. Hey, welcome back, exercisers, to the Exercise is Health podcast, brought to you by Exercise for Life Studios, where we believe that your health is your most valuable asset, and the single best thing that you can do to both boost and protect this asset is exercise. Specifically, exercise is geared towards building the health and function of your muscles. We are your hosts, Charlie
and Julie,
and today we are diving into this topic of frozen shoulder. Okay, frozen shoulder is something that happens to a lot of people, especially as they get into their 40s, into their 50s, into their 60s. These shoulder issues start coming up that often get labeled as frozen shoulder. Now, this is distinctly different than, say, a rotator cuff issue or an impingement or something like that, okay? A frozen shoulder is often characterized by a lack of mobility with the shoulder and often very painful mobility with the shoulder. And it's something that, for a lot of people, seems to come on all of a sudden, but the truth is there are actually some signs and symptoms that start much earlier that people just aren't aware of, and then they just kind of culminate, and all of a sudden it's like, whoa, what in the world happened to my shoulder? So today we want to start discussing the role that muscles can play not only in the development of frozen shoulder, but in potentially the resolution of frozen shoulder as well.
Now, what's interesting about frozen shoulder, and really this stems to a lot of quote-unquote diagnosed things going on in your body, is that we feel like we can find the cause. And so if you were to ask professionals or look up on Google, well, what's the cause of frozen shoulder? You'll see hands down that it's an issue with inflammation. Now, here's the problem with just blaming inflammation, is that muscles literally control every single joint in your body. So even if a joint is not working well or not moving well or is giving you lots of feedback in terms of really painful symptoms, and you are like, well, the issue is not my muscles, it's inflammation. Well, the issue is still strongly in your muscles because the muscles are all over the joint, and especially the shoulder joint. Shoulder joint is probably the top muscularly controlled joint, and we'll talk about why. In the whole body, because of its structure, because of its opportunity for movement, there's less bony support like a hip, there's more muscular support because muscles have this cool thing where they can allow lots of motion while giving support. And what we find is that when muscle support is very low for a handful of reasons, we find that mobility then becomes very low, and the symptoms with mobility becomes very high, meaning you get a lot of uncomfortable motion, or your body just stops you from moving. It won't let you move any further. You're like, I can't even lift my arm up. Those are all very characteristic of frozen shoulder, but what's often, as Charlie said, not talked about is the muscular influence, and we know that the muscles have a huge, giant influence over how the shoulder is moving.
Absolutely. It's kind of like if you drive a specific route to work and every time you make a right-hand turn, your tires rub the curb, and then all of a sudden the tires start getting worn down. You're like, well, I have a tire issue. It's like, well, actually you have a steering issue. You're not positioning your car correctly. You don't have the ability to control and position your car so you're not hitting the curb. And yes, while the outward issue appears to be the tire, getting, rubbed down, and that's definitely something that needs to be, changed or looked at. The underlying issue of why it keeps happening or why it's there in the first place is the steering, right? And so similarly with the shoulders, a lot of times when we get these symptoms within the joints or, the surrounding tissue of the joints, we want to blame that is not only where the symptom is, but also the reason for the symptom. And what we're saying is actually there are a lot of different potential components for the reason. Our expertise is the muscles, and we have seen time and time again for almost a decade and a half now that when the muscles function better, so many of the different things that we want to blame on the surrounding tissues, on the joints, as far as this is the reason why I'm having an issue, those actually calm way, way down, and frozen shoulder fits perfectly into that category as well.
Yes, and so we're going to give you our perspectives on things that we have seen work all the time with helping people overcome their frozen shoulder, because the thing is that it takes a really long time for frozen shoulder to resolve itself. So that means that you probably have a good chunk of time to play with some stuff. And what you can do in the meantime with your muscle system can be a really powerful input into helping this area heal, get back to normal motion, get back to strong motion, and so that you can be living your life the way that you want to be living it. Now, as exercise specialists, we are never able to call the stuff we talk about a treatment, because we don't treat frozen shoulder as a MAT specialist or as a personal trainer. But here's the thing, when we get the muscles working as they should, and we help clients promote getting their muscles working as they should, so many issues resolve. It's kind of like saying you went from a diet of, Cheez-Its and cereal in the morning to now you eat, wholesome fruits and vegetables and, whole grain pastas. And people are like, oh, well, what was the diet that you did there? You're like, well, I just went to like a more wholesome diet, like what our bodies should be eating. Instead of processed stuff, I went to more wholesome stuff. That's what we're going to be suggesting here. This is not a treatment, but it's saying, hey, how do we just maintenance the muscles and make sure the muscles, especially those ones that are going to have a high influence over the mobility and foundational support for this shoulder, if we can get those muscles working better and give them the right input, so many things in the body and in the shoulder will change in a positive direction in terms of helping you manage and decrease inflammation and helping you make sure that those muscles are operating properly, because really it comes down to one thing that can move your body, and that's muscles. So if they're not working well, it's going to be really hard for your body to move that shoulder in the first place.
Absolutely. So one thing that we see across the board with people is when they are physically stronger, their bodies do better, okay? And not just like stronger in the area that's symptomatic, but throughout their entire system. So the first thing we really want you to consider is making sure that you're doing strength training for your entire body. Yes, if you have frozen shoulder, that means that your shoulder's bothering you to some extent, but that doesn't mean that you can't get your legs stronger, that you can't get your core muscles stronger, the rest of your muscles like through your low back and the rest of your trunk, all right? Oftentimes by getting those areas stronger, it can help support the shoulder better, and you may start to notice just some changes just simply by getting those areas functioning better. I mean, I can't tell you the number of clients that I've had where by getting the muscles of their core functioning better and getting them stronger, their frozen shoulder symptoms like go away. It's nuts, okay? And I'm not saying that that will happen for you. What I am saying is that by getting your body stronger, you now have a more capable body overall to be able to tolerate any kind of stresses that are being placed upon areas that aren't functioning as well, okay? So that is our step one for you, is focus on getting your body stronger, doing total body strength training, again, including your legs, including your core, including your trunk, and then starting to work your way up into your shoulders.
Absolutely. So if you think about your body is made up of however many joints, think of all the motions you can do in the gym. Every motion needs to be getting challenged and stimulated to stay healthy and strong. And just because you have one area of your body that's giving you symptoms and feedback of pain or discomfort, or hey, we can't move the way we normally move, it doesn't mean everywhere else has to lose conditioning. And a side note to that, just as Charlie said, the amount of times that we see people starting to strength train through their body and the symptom in their shoulder, even though they've done nothing in their shoulder, starts to change in a very positive and dramatic way, is literally mind-blowing. I'm always shocked. I'm like, wow. I'm working with a client right now that has not frozen shoulder, but definitely some funkiness in her shoulder. And when we do core exercise first, shoulder exercises second, she's asymptomatic, no symptoms. She feels great. She can lift. She can get that conditioning through her shoulder. When we do shoulder exercises first and then core after, then she has symptoms in her shoulder. But it just goes to show how much of a strong interplay the entire body system has in the shoulder. The other thing I want to bring up that makes it a lot more specific than just like, hey, I should just keep my whole body strong, is that the shoulder has a big part of it called your shoulder blade. If you ever heard of like your scapula or your shoulder blade, your shoulder blade does not have a socket, like a joint socket that it sits in, like your hip, or you think of like your glenohumeral, like the shoulder joint. It doesn't have like a bony structure to sit in and support it. It's actually completely gliding on your rib cage, on your back, by muscles, and it's supported by muscles. And so the more that you're strengthening the muscles of your spine and of your hips, everything that's supporting your rib cage and your spine, and even up in your neck muscles, those are going to have very direct connection to how your shoulder is able to function, because they're literally the same muscles. You're just training them in a different way.
Okay, so that is step one. Make sure that you are strengthening your entire body. Step two is when you start to do strengthening for the shoulder specifically, there's something very, very important that you need to keep in mind with your strengthening, and this flies in the face of what a lot of kind of traditional ways of addressing frozen shoulder will suggest. And that is, when you're doing your strength training for your shoulder, stay within your pain-free range of motion, all right? There shouldn't be any pain, there shouldn't be any symptoms. Most ways of trying to address frozen shoulder are almost trying to get you to push through that. It's like, okay, well, it's just gonna hurt. You're just gonna have to get through it. Like, that's a lot of the mentality out there around trying to help people address their frozen shoulder. And what we're saying is the complete opposite. Yes, you want to get your shoulder muscles stronger, but do so within the range of motion where you don't have any symptoms.
That's right. So if you're hearing that, you're like, okay, so every shoulder motion that I know in the gym is symptomatic, Charlie. What should I do? The big thing we want you to think about is changing your range. You can change your positioning, but the biggest one is going to be range. So let me give you an example of this. Let's say a shoulder motion that you like to do is you keep your arms by your side pretty straight, and then you lift with dumbbells out to the side, like a lateral raise. That's a really great shoulder exercise. So let's say the bottom half is pretty asymptomatic, or maybe even just the bottom quarter or the bottom inch is asymptomatic, and then the rest you either can't do or is really, really painful. Like if you were to do it, you would get any kind of symptoms, whether it's really mild, like it's just a little twingy, or it's so painful you'd be coming to tears. Those are all the range of symptoms, but we're gonna label all of those as symptoms. So you would just pick the range that is asymptomatic, no matter how small it is. You might be thinking, well, that sounds ridiculous. Like, if I just do 2 inches, is that really doing anything? And we do know that it does actually a lot. So if you only have the bottom quarter of the range, great. Keep working your bottom quarter of the range as long as it's asymptomatic. Now, you're going to apply that principle to every exercise that you would do with your shoulders. So, for example, like a chest press, you'd find positioning and range that is asymptomatic, even if it seems like the smallest amount. Because when you train your body like, hey, I have this small amount that is okay, that is asymptomatic, and then I go and challenge it a little bit or a lot of it, and it is able to get stronger and get that conditioning effect, your body will give you more range. The place and time when your body gives you less range is when you're saying, hey, I'm here at my chest press, the back, I have this small section that's asymptomatic, but the rest is symptomatic. And I'm just going to push through because like a chest press should look like a chest press. I should do my full range and, no pain, no gain. That is where your body will start giving you less and less, start tightening your muscles more and more and giving you more and more inflammation. Here's why. Because your body is protecting you and stopping you and giving you symptoms for a reason. And when we ignore them and say, well, I know better, I'm going to push through because this is what a chest press looks like. This is what I want to do. This is what, makes me feel like I've done chest presses versus, the tiny motion that's asymptomatic that seems silly. What your body will do is protect you more because now you're regularly and continually violating almost like the barriers your body has given you. So stay within your pain-free, symptom-free range of motion as you start exploring into that shoulder, which is obviously symptomatic if you're having frozen shoulder. And you will be shocked at how often your body will start giving you more range. The more that you respect the range that you do have, the more your body will give you more asymptomatic range.
Yeah, that's definitely something consistent that we see across the board is the more you are staying within your symptom-free range of motion, the more range of motion your body will give you within its structural limits, okay? So definitely keep this in mind when you are doing not just a strengthening for your shoulder, but the strengthening for your entire body as well. Staying within your pain-free, symptom-free range of motion, even if you're having frozen shoulder type symptoms, when you strengthen the rest of your body will only help to support your shoulder even more. Now, the third tip that we want to give you, and I would say step 3, but really this could be placed anywhere in the order, is you need to be doing muscle activation techniques, okay? MAT is going to figure out exactly which muscles that are surrounding your shoulder, as well as through your trunk and through your hips, they aren't working well, okay? For some reason, your shoulder is taking on a lot of stress and creating a lot of symptoms. And sometimes that is just an issue with the shoulder itself. But more times than not, there is dysfunction throughout your trunk, maybe up into your neck, into the hips, knees, possibly down even into the feet, okay? I've seen so many clients for MAT that are coming in with shoulder issues that by working through their trunk, working through their hips, working through their feet, getting those groups of muscles functioning better, we don't need to do anything with the shoulder. Like, we legitimately do not even touch the shoulder, and their shoulder gets better. Why is that? Because their shoulder was having to take on more and more and more stress for all the other dysfunctional areas that are going throughout their system, okay? So the MAT process will help to identify where within your body you're experiencing this dysfunction, even if it's not symptomatic, and then go about addressing those dysfunctional muscles directly, which again, if it's in the shoulder, can help the shoulder to function better. If it's not in the shoulder, will help to support the shoulder, ultimately allowing the shoulder to function better.
That's right. So when you think about doing exercises, you're strengthening the muscles that are currently working well. And when you think about doing muscle activation techniques, you are actually trying to get more and more muscles on board and available to being used. So that's why a lot of people, when they are doing corrective exercises or, restorative exercises for the shoulder or things they're finding on YouTube, they can make it a good amount of weight, but if they're feeling like they're not making huge strides, well, then they probably have a muscle function issue, and the muscles just need to be brought back on board with something like muscle activation techniques. So if you're in the Chicagoland area, we definitely want to see you in our schedule. We can help you out with that. Or if you are across the country, not in the area, you can always go to muscleactivation.com and find a practitioner in your area.
All right, so if you're hearing these 3 tips, you're like, okay, well, how do I go about implementing strength training into my routine? How do I make sure I'm staying within my symptom-free range of motion? That's exactly what we teach you to do within the Exercise for Life membership. Right now, you can get 30 days free to try out all the different programs within there, where we walk you through step by step exactly how to figure out where your symptom-free range of motion is, the things that you need to pay attention to, and then how to integrate that information within every single workout that you do, whether it's strength training, whether it's cardio, whether it's plyometrics or balance work or whatever. Again, all you have to do to get signed up and get started for free is go to www.exerciseforlifestudios.com. And like Julie said, if you're in the Chicagoland area and would like to get on our schedule for muscle activation techniques, get your body assessed and start figuring out where you have muscles that are not working as well as they should, all you have to do is go to www.matschaumburg.com. There's a big green button that says get started. So you just click that button. You'll see our availability. You'll see our schedule. You can book yourself into our schedule for your consultation and assessment right from there. So who do you know that needs to hear this episode? Who do you know that has either had frozen shoulder in the past or is currently battling frozen shoulder? Share this episode with them so they can understand the different components that their muscles may be playing in what they are experiencing and what they can do about it. And while you're online, head on over to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to us and leave us a rating and review. It helps people find our podcast when they're looking for information on exercise and when they're looking for information on health. So if you found value in this conversation today, let us know by leaving us that 5-star rating and review. Well, thanks so much for tuning in. We always appreciate it. Have a fantastic week, and we'll talk with you all next week.
This podcast is for information purposes only. The statements and views on this podcast are not medical advice. This podcast, including Julie and Charlie Gates, disclaim responsibility for any possible adverse effects from the use of information contained herein. Opinions of guests are their own, and this podcast does not endorse or accept responsibility for statements made by guests. This podcast does not make any representations or warranties about guest qualifications or credibility. This podcast may contain paid endorsements or advertisements for products or services. Individuals on this podcast may have a direct or indirect financial interest in products or services referred to herein. If you think you have a medical issue, consult a licensed physician.